welcome to the 14th Annual Kristallnacht Lecture at the University of La Verne. My name is Xandra Wagoner. I'm our university's chaplain, and I am so delighted to be able to welcome everyone here. Our featured speaker will be introduced in just a moment by someone else, but I'll just share a few things first. So first of all, thank you for everyone's patience. For those of you who have been here many times in the past, we needed to change the venue just for this year. Thank you for your flexibility today. We know it's not a very accessible space and just different than in the past. This afternoon's lecture is jointly sponsored by the University of La Verne and the Jewish Federation of the Greater San Gabriel and Pomona Valleys. The event acknowledges and honors the memory of Kristallnacht. Wednesday, November 9th, marked the 83rd anniversary, I think it is, of this tragic event. Kristallnacht literally means night of crystal and is often referred to as the night of broken glass. The name refers to the violent wave of anti-Jewish pogroms which took place throughout Nazi Germany and Austria on November 9 and 10 in 1938. The violence resulted in the loss of Jewish lives and the destruction of Jewish stores, buildings, and synagogues, littering the streets with shards of broken glass. Kristallnacht is often understood as the beginning of the Jewish Holocaust. And this annual lecture series gives our community the opportunity to focus on Jewish history and experience, to make links between the past and our own challenges today, and to gather in a spirit of remembrance and reflection. And it's so good to be together. So at this time, I am delighted to introduce John Carlton, who will bring greetings from the Jewish Federation and introduce our featured speaker and author. The university has had a special relationship and partnership with the Jewish Federation of this area. Mr. Carlton is a retired lawyer of 41 years, has served as a board member, chairperson on a number of community organizations. I also learned that you write music, you sing, acts, and especially relevant for this evening, Mr. Carlton is past president of the Jewish Federation of the Greater San Gabriel and Pomona Valleys and is currently its chief financial officer. So please join me in welcoming. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wagner, and thanks to all of you here today for supporting this event, which I think is really one of the most important things that the Jewish Federation does every year. And we are so pleased that we've been able to partner with the University of La Verne for all these many years to commemorate Kristallnacht. Dr. Wagner has given you a brief description of that event. I won't repeat it here. But in memory of Kristallnacht and of the Holocaust that followed it, which continue to reverberate even today, I would ask that we all share a moment of silence. Thank you. Just a little bit about the Jewish Federation. I'm sure most of you know quite a bit about it, but that's not going to stop me. The Federation represents the Jewish community in a very, very large region which stretches from Glendale in the west to Rancho Cucamonga and south to Whittier. And we're fortunate that the University of La Verne is located right in the heart of our community. The Jewish Federation's mission, as you probably know, is to strengthen and enhance Jewish life in our region. And we do this by providing programs and services that support the needs of the Jewish population, programs that supplement those of our local synagogues and other Jewish organizations. Now, one of our major programs is the Jewish Book Festival, now celebrating its 26th year. Each year, the book festival strives to bring a wide array of authors to our community, and it uses multiple venues, such as the University of Laverne, the various synagogues in our region, and other places, to bring to the Jewish community authors from around the country and to give everyone an opportunity to meet with them. Now, the festival would not be possible without the loyal and hardworking members of the Jewish Book Festival Committee. These dedicated volunteers work tirelessly for 9 months of the year to bring this event to the community every year. And critical to success of the Jewish Book Festival is the financial support of our literary circle, a group of people who see the book festival as a means of making our Jewish community stronger and more vibrant. And we also have a number of community partners, including the University of Laverne. And I thank all of you for helping to make this event happen year after year for over a quarter of a century. We couldn't do it without you. And a special thank you to Rebecca Russell, the Jewish Federation's Program and Community Outreach Coordinator, who oversees this event. There are several upcoming events. Among them, November 14th, you can join us for our first ever local authors night at Temple Beth Israel in Highland Park, featuring 5 of the most creative authors in Southern California. And on December 1st, author Naomi Machar will be discussing her novel In the Shadow of the Greenbrier at Temple Ami Shalom in Covina. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce to you this afternoon's author, Arthur J. Magida. Mr. Magida is an award-winning author, journalist, and Pulitzer nominee. He's been a contributing correspondent to PBS's Religion and Ethics News Weekly, a senior editor of the Baltimore Jewish Times, and editorial director for Jewish Lights Publishing. This afternoon, he will talk about his fascinating and inspirational true story, Two Wheels to Freedom, the story of a young Jew, wartime resistance, and a daring escape. Please welcome Arthur Magida.
I'm always happy when people pronounce my name correctly. That's all I want out of life. Okay. Well, thank you very much, University of Laverne. I've never been in Laverne before. This is a wonderful experience for me. Also, maybe about an hour and a half ago, I discovered with a new friend the church where the closing scene of the film The Graduate was shot. That's really made my day. I mean, this is making my day also, but that was phenomenal and unexpected. Thank you also, Jewish Federation, and we've already heard some of the names of the folks who helped organize this event. Shelley, Debbie, Rebecca. I also had a wonderful driver over here today from my hotel. Tina, you're a good driver, but I really don't recommend you attempting a Grand Prix, but thank God for GPSs. I lived in Venice for a number of years in the late 70s, I suppose. I'd never made it over to this part of Southern California, and both on the Uber ride yesterday, the non-Uber ride today, I was just fascinated by the mountains. You are so privileged to have those in your backyard. I'm in Baltimore. We don't have much in our backyard. I wish we had mountains. Someday we will. Perhaps. I'm sure things are going to change. I'm delighted to be here. This is really a treat for me. And it's a treat for me to talk about my book, Two Wheels to Freedom, a book about an individual, Cioma Schoenhaus, who came out of nowhere. I'll explain why and how in a little while. And he fascinated and intrigued and inspired me. And he especially has in the last week or two or three, as we've seen what's been happening in the world, as we've seen all these hot spots that at least are gnawing at my conscience and my sense of what the future may be. And I don't know where this nation's going. I don't know where this world is going. None of us do. The future is always a puzzle and a conundrum. But Sioma always assured me, even though he died about 8 years ago at this point, that we as a species will survive, that we as a species will someday, somehow, unite and cohere and address all our needs. So I thank Sioma Schoenhaus. I consider him to be a hero. And most of us don't have 20-year-old heroes. Sioma was. His innate high spirits are staggering, especially when set against the sorrow that we associate with the Holocaust. Hiding in Berlin for almost a year, Sioma faked IDs for hundreds of other Jews who were hiding. He bought a sailboat, though he never sailed before. He sabotaged weapons in the munitions factory where he was working. He had lots of girlfriends. He dined at swanky restaurants and fashionable bars. He was doing all this while he was, quote, hiding. And as the Gestapo closed in on Sioma, he escaped the Nazis by biking 600 miles over 5 weeks to Switzerland. That by itself is a feat. But he was also the only person to bike his way out of the Third Reich, and he was one of the few Jews to whom Switzerland gave refuge. It was too busy sending 27,000 other Jews back to Germany. Thank you, Switzerland. In 1943, when Sioma went into hiding, roughly 8,500 other Jews did the same in Berlin. But Sioma did not hide like everybody else was in Berlin or indeed in the rest of Europe. Not in sheds, not in basements, or indeed like the most famous person who was hiding during the war, Anne Frank, in Amsterdam. Exuberant and charming, Sioma refused to be bottled up, separate from life. For Sioma, surviving meant looking and acting like he belonged wherever he was. Appearing so confident, so assured, so certain of himself that no one could guess he was one of the hunted who the Nazis were chasing down day after day after day as relentlessly as they could. Until the last 3 months that he was underground, or Sioma's idea of underground, he was out and about, enjoying the almost normal life of an almost normal 20-year-old in Hitler's capital. And all this, I know, may sound crazy, it may sound zany, it may sound wacky. Jews who were hiding were supposed to stay hidden. That was their job. Sioma broke every rule. He smashed every expectation. He did what no one else did. And yet, I assure you, this story is entirely true. I've been questioned about that in interviews, on TV, on radio, on podcasts, and so on. And it's true. I've had to assure people coast to coast. And that's why I call Sioma Schoenhaus a connoisseur of outrageous, life-saving, and totally original gestures. Spunky, stubborn, and full of pluck. Sioma could not have done what he did without all of that. Lacking those qualities, Sioma would not have been Sioma, and we would have on our hands a really boring guy, from whom we could learn nothing about history or about courage or about improvising our way back into life as we were being deprived of it for much too long. Sioma's story inspires us to do more than we think we can do in life. It prods us to save others while saving ourselves. And what is more important than saving ourselves so we can save others? He urges us to cherish good, to protect the weak and the threatened, to never falter as we defy those who seek to oppress us or silence what is in our hearts. Freedom is too precious to let cranks destroy it with their crazed fantasies. If Sioma, while still barely out of his teens, could devise almost single-handedly his resistance against one of the most savage regimes in history, then surely we can do no less as we labor to preserve our liberties and our dignities. He is a clarion call to the best of us, a clarion call to the best in us. Now, helping Sioma do his best to live like a normal 20-year-old was a string of girlfriends, each of whom had her own unique and compelling story. Oh, this works, except I hit it too hard. Helene, don't worry, I'll get back to you in a minute. Dorothy, don't go there. Okay, this is Dorothy. Dorothy, one of his several girlfriends, and believe me, it was very hard to get these photos. Dorothy and Sioma had intimate relations. Good for them. She left Germany roughly early 1943, along with her entire family. She left Germany in the best of all ways. She was smuggled out of Germany by the Abwehr, the German spy agency. Yes, they worked for Hitler. Yes, some of them, especially the guy at the top, hated Hitler. And they did their best to escort and smuggle Jews out of this country to a place where they would be safe. And that's Dorothy's backstory. Believe me, when I first learned about the Abwehr getting people out of Germany, I was stunned, and I researched, and confirmed that over and over again. Okay, we also, Lotte, I'm sorry. We also have Lotte Lindmuller. For a few months in maybe 1941, Sioma was working at a labor camp in Germany. He met Lotte. They liked each other very, very much. They were both very, very young. They both had this really intense crush on each other. They didn't know what you do with that crush, especially in a labor camp. Sioma left that camp a few months after he met her. He went to an art school in Berlin, and I'm totally befuddled why the Nazis allowed an all-Jewish art school to open in Berlin during the war, but they did. Sioma went there for about 1.5 years. Lotte stayed in the camp, became engaged to somebody else, and roughly late 1942, she was taken to Auschwitz. You know what happened to her and to many, many others. And then we have, no, please, I gotta be more sensitive with this thing, Helene Jacobs. Helene was a courageous Christian woman who hid Sioma in her apartment for 3 months in Berlin. She served essentially as a courier between those who provided Sioma with IDs for him to fake and doctor as flawlessly as he could, and then she would pass them on to those who were in desperate straits. She actually survived the war. She ended up spending a good part of her post-war years in Germany, still helping Jews and assuring that those who were living in the city or living elsewhere in Germany were receiving the benefits that they were entitled to from the German government. And finally, if I can use this thing properly, thank you, there's Renate Klepper. Renate was the stepdaughter of the man shown there, Joachim Klepper. He was a very famous, very successful novelist starting in the mid-1930s, so successful that Nazis wanted to be with him. He was invited to lavish parties. He got to know some of the Nazi elite. War came. He was able to have his older daughter taken to England. He was desperate for Renate to get out of the country as well. And because he knew so many of the Nazi higher-ups, he banged on door after door after door, and finally he went to his formerly good friend, Adolf Eichmann. And Eichmann, being Eichmann, essentially toyed with Joachim for months and months and months. Well, this is a very large bureaucracy. We're trying to see what we can do to help you. I assure you, this is being processed day after day after day, and we're not forgetting about your daughter at all. Finally, Joachim got a call. Eichmann wanted to see him. This is December 1942. Joachim went to his office, sat down. Eichmann played him like a sucker. We've reached a decision about your daughter, and we've decided she is not getting an exit visa. Joachim went home that night. He, his wife, his daughter went into the kitchen, closed the door, turned the gas on, committed suicide. And she was the one who our friend Sioma loved the most. And in my book, if I can find it, I say Sioma truly experienced love in the time of fascism. If this had been another country or another time, Renate and Sioma might have had a life together. But this was Germany, and they were Jews, and Jews were allotted no future here. They were barely granted a present. Whatever time they had was shrinking, shriveling. Renate and Sioma sensed that, but they couldn't quantify it or enumerate it. No one could. Still, their intuition cautioned that to be young and in love in Berlin meant to cherish each moment and each touch, and then release them. Holding on to them risked disappointment, despair, or worse. This wasn't the normal that Sioma was seeking. By November 38, in fact, he may have realized that his normal would never be normal, and that was the month of Kristallnacht. Sioma lived just a few blocks away from a massive synagogue that had gone up in smoke. He saw those flames and he smelled the smoke. Jewish-owned stores, of course, were looted and destroyed, and Sioma saw the shattered glass over sidewalks wherever he went. 30,000 Jewish men were locked up in Dachau and Buchenwald and other camps. And Sioma heard the wailing of the families they left behind. And desperate, Sioma begged his father to move their family out of Germany. Already a cousin of his and his family had moved to America, actually to New Jersey, right across the river from New York City. Boris, Sioma's father, refused to move. He and Fanya, Sioma's mother, had emigrated from Russia to Germany in 1919, from Germany to Palestine in 1926, from Palestine back to Germany when 4-year-old Sioma got sick and he needed medical care that was not available in Palestine. Boris figured that another move would be his ruin. No, he told his son, I'm not leaving. You don't make the same mistake 3 times. And then, trying to make 16-year-old Sioma recognize the silliness of his ways, Boris said, we'll stay. And if we don't do anything, nothing will happen. What are they going to do? Kill us? You create a Sioma Schoenhaus by teaching him how to be stubborn. That's where his father came in. We're not moving. And you teach him not to give in to despair or helplessness. That's where his mother came in. No despair. I did it correctly. There's Sioma on my right, and his mother, grandmother, father. Father, we're not moving. Don't make the same mistake 3 times. But his mother was the supreme optimist. For a while during the war, Sioma worked in a tailor shop, sometimes delivering new uniforms to the army. And on one of those trips, a soldier took Sioma aside and showed him photos of thin, emaciated men, skeletons really, in clothes that were striped and baggy and didn't deserve to be called clothes. The men in the photos hardly looked human. Somehow Sioma knew they were. He also somehow knew they were Jews. The soldier had taken these photos while he was on duty in Poland. He'd seen chimneys belching smoke, and he'd smelled burning flesh, and he'd witnessed ashes drifting upward toward an uncomprehending sky, toward a supposedly all-knowing God who knew not what his children were doing or why. Sioma went home, and he told his mother about the photos he'd seen. "You're crazy," Vanya said. "They can't do anything like that. They cannot kill millions of people who haven't done anything. No, you cannot talk me into believing that." And then pointing towards a bright, cloudless sky which offered hope and good cheer, Vanya did her best to convince Sioma that the only immutable truth was the beauty around them, the pull of the sun and the moon, the stars and the streets and life. "Look how beautiful the world is," she told Sioma. "The Nazis can do whatever they want, but they will never stop the sun from shining." The optimist and the stubborn father. Well, stubbornness and optimism got Sioma's parents only so far. They boarded trains in June 1942, never to be seen again. Sioma at that point was working in a munitions factory, and he was exempt from those trains because of his work. But soon realizing that no Jew was safe in Berlin, he sold all his parents' possessions, pots, pans, linen, furniture, so he could have money to live on, and he went underground, moving from one rented room to another, keeping his head down and always taking risks in search of the normal he always craved. We're talking about Sioma, so of course there were more girlfriends. He also went to one of the finest restaurants in Berlin for lunch and dinner. This was in Hotel Esplanade, which was one of Hitler's favorite hotels in the city. Sioma lived a very risky, highfalutin life. He also went sailing. This is Lake Stassensee near Berlin, just on the edge of the city. Frequent outings on this lake, on the boat that he bought, on the boat which he taught himself how to sail because he had never been on a sailboat before. The boat came with the name of Comrade, and that was perfect. Who would not want a comrade 4 years into this horrible war? The boat helped Sioma forget about the strain of hiding and that his parents were dead, and many of his friends and relatives were dead, and any day now he might be dead too. The boat let Sioma be what he longed to be, what any 20-year-old in Berlin longed to be: happy, likable, charming, and when girls were on board, be flirtatious as hell. Even in Berlin, especially in Berlin, a boy had to have some fun. Sioma did. The boat, the comrade, helped Sioma be as much of a man of leisure as a Jew could be in Berlin. Was there another Holocaust survivor who was such a bon vivant, who took such risks in public, who was a boulevardier of the underground? There he is. What a dashing fellow. Few other Jews in Berlin refused to let the glumness of the Third Reich swallow them the way Sioma did. Knowing how unique Sioma was, I urged readers of the book, Two Wills to Freedom, to wake up. Because I wrote at the beginning of the book, the Holocaust has been covered so widely in books and films, museums and photos, it runs the risks of readers being indifferent to it, thinking they've been told everything there is to know about these horrible years. And not so, I say, in the opening pages of Two Wills to Freedom. Read on, if you will, I state. Read on for tales of courage and charm and pluck. Read on even if you think you heard it all before and you don't want to hear it again. Read on, for Sioma's exuberance doesn't correspond to the usual story of Jews or of anyone in Europe during World War II. His joys and pleasures, sorrows and sadnesses were shaped by knowing what we can do when no one suspects we can do anything. Through persistence and determination and the delight in defying the odds, Sioma's spirit was free and expansive, a light on a continent in which most of the lights had gone out. Sioma offset all the losses that he suffered, all the losses that so many other people suffered, with his audacious adventures and never ceasing to continue on his way. Spirits high, chin up, rarely looking back, as should we. If only we can learn from the stories we haven't heard yet, like his, the stories that out of nowhere engage and charm and broaden us. Sioma's story proves that to survive, we need a purpose. He needed one. Yeah, going to fancy restaurants was fun. Learning how to sail a boat was fun. Having way more girlfriends than I ever did, I guess was fun. I wouldn't know. But he needed a purpose, and that came when a friend who needed Sioma asked him to make a fake ID for a friend who was about to go into hiding. That friend knew that Sioma had gone to that art school I mentioned a minute ago. Sioma could not commit to doing this. Saving someone's life was a big responsibility, especially for someone barely out of his teens. Sioma's friend persisted. Sioma agreed. Fake ID number one. And fake ID number one went to a guy named Yitzhak Schwarzens, who I never heard of before, whose last name I'm probably not pronouncing correctly. Not long after Yitzhak got the fake ID from Sioma, he created something called Klug Chalutzi, the Pioneer Circle. This was the only Jewish youth group that had been created in all of Germany during the war. The only group that provided food and hiding places in Berlin for children and teenagers. Yitzhak is the fellow with the mustache. This group, thanks to Yitzhak, had a complete curriculum day after day after day in Berlin. Different days of the week, they hiked, they played sports, they attended concerts, operas, films, they learned Hebrew, English, the Bible, the history of Palestine, the tenets of Zionism. On Fridays, Yitzhak and the kids planned their next week. Saturdays were devoted to reading the play or the opera they would see that Monday and discussing politics, Jewish history, and literature. Without the ID that Sioma made for Yitzhak, Yitzhak probably would not have survived. And without Yitzchak, the 50 kids in Kalitsi would not have survived either. For a guy who was reluctant to fake IDs, Sioma could not have made a better debut in the counterfeiting business. And after that, he was faking 50 to 20 IDs a week, eventually giving IDs to about 200 Jews who were hiding. But even the best forgers run out of luck. And Sioma's did during the summer of 1943, as one by one, the Nazis arrested members of his cell that was helping Jews who were hiding. Sioma knew that if he stayed in Berlin, he would be killed. He bought a bike on the black market. He planned to bicycle all the way to Switzerland through deepest, darkest Nazi Germany. His friends thought he was totally crazy. One even offered Sioma a pistol to take on his trip. He could shoot his brains out if he got into any trouble, or he could shoot any German soldiers who tried to stop him from crossing the border. Sioma turned down the offer. September 4th, 43, Sioma started for Switzerland. His first day was actually a tour of German anti-Semitism, though he didn't plan it that way. He stopped for lunch in the town of Bielitz, maybe 12, 15 miles outside of Berlin. Town had burned its entire Jewish population alive in 1943 for allegedly desecrating communion wafers. Heck of a town to decide to have some luncheon while you're biking to Switzerland. Sioma continued another 60 miles or so. Spent the night in the town of Wittenberg, home of Martin Luther. Oh boy, okay, that's actually one of the last and only remaining IDs that Sioma created. This is in the Museum of Unsung Heroes, Silent Heroes in Berlin. I recommend you go there. But this, I hope, is the photo I was looking for. Sioma spent his first night out of Berlin in the town of Wittenberg. That's where Martin Luther started his Reformation, which apparently needed more reforming, because this sculpture is on the side to this day of Martin Luther's church. If you can't make it out, that's a pig. There are Jewish children under the pig, suckling on the pig's teats. And at the back of the pig, there is a rabbi pulling the Talmud out of the tuchus of the pig. I took that photo. Go to Wittenberg, you will see it. Cycling onward, Sioma passed through towns, villages. He went skinny dipping in a river. He was stopped only 3 times, once by a policeman who very politely advised this young man who was on a bicycle to ride in the bike lanes, not in the middle of the road like he was doing. Early October, Sioma crossed a stream near the village of Oningen, and then he was in Switzerland. The Nazis had not overlooked this tiny town in the southwestern corner of Germany. It's about as far as you could get from Berlin and still be in Germany. On Kristallnacht, 1938, Oningen's synagogue was burned, and the few local Jews who lived there were sent to Dachau. In Switzerland, Sioma was placed in a refugee camp for a few months. One day, he approached a newcomer who had just arrived from Germany. Sioma insisted he knew him, though he could not figure out how. Stranger said he'd never seen Sioma. They went back and forth for a while, with Sioma saying, I know you, I'm sure I know you. And the stranger, a guy named Walter, saying, I've never seen you before in my life. Well, the next day, Sioma, who's on my far right in that photo, went back up to Walter, and he said, I know where I recognize you from. I spent hours making a fake ID for you and staring at your photo all that time. Well, sometimes even Sioma was surprised by what he accomplished. Once in Switzerland, Sioma stayed there. That was his home, his new adopted land. He became a very good graphic artist. He married, once. That's Stella, no time for her, sorry, Stella. This is his wife, Rosemarie. They had 2 kids. They were married for about 12, 14 years and got divorced. with his second wife. Sorry, don't have a photo of her. He had 2 more children. They also went into the graphic design business. And he had a wonderful relationship with all of them, very warm and very affectionate. And eventually he came to terms with Germany. And in some way, how he did that is illustrious for us and instrumental in how we can comport ourselves today. I believe that if Sioma Schoenhaus can accept Germans, accept Germany, we too can accept or at least come somehow to civil and decent terms with those who perhaps anger us, those who get our dander us up, those who infuriate and dismay us. We can't deny that this is a tragically divided country, but it's incumbent on all of us to find ways to make amends and ways to have conversations and not constant arguments. Sioma died September 22nd, 2015. Oh, that's a photo, if you can see it, of Sioma giving his oldest son a bike ride. I don't have a photo of the bike ride he took down to Switzerland, but here he is on a bike with his son, who's then 5, and this was taken about 1955. Sioma died September 2015. This was 4 days short of his 93rd birthday. It was also Yom Kippur. And not long before he died, I wrote in my book, one of Sioma's sons asked him, how can one be sure if a decision is right or wrong? And Sioma answered, everything that leads to life is good. An assurance that the good is worth pursuing every day and in every way. Though Sioma had little use for religion, he thought it divided people more than it united them. His aphorism that everything that leads to life is good was about as classic a Jewish statement as it got. Deuteronomy 30:19 says, I have put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life. Sioma chose life. Let us hope all of us choose life. Let us hope our nation, and indeed the entire world, chooses life. Thank you.
Is there another mic? No. Okay, no worries. So what we're gonna do is, of course, we're gonna have some Q&A time. And if you have a question, if you wouldn't mind standing up just so that your voice carries a little bit more, and then we will make sure that the question gets repeated up here. You can repeat it, but if you need a little, we might, in the end, I'll just be up here as a backup. But we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A, and...
You can answer the question.
No, you'll be answering. And we already have some hands going up. Just a second. Could we get a pen from... Oh, you got it. All right.
I know what I'm doing.
Great. So the first hand, why don't we go here first, please?
How many years did you take to research this book?
I finished it yesterday. Question was, how many years did it take for me to finish this book? First, I had to start the book. That's a convoluted story if everybody's up for a brief deal of convolution. I promise. Stop flashing that damn light. I know. I actually discovered Sioma in 2011 when I was in Berlin researching another book. I was minding my own business. near Heckescher Square. Maybe somebody is familiar with it if you've ever been in Berlin. I was walking near Heckescher, past an entrance to a courtyard. There was a large plaque of a photo of Anne Frank. And I thought, why is Anne Frank here? She's supposed to be in Amsterdam. But I walked into the courtyard. There was an Anne Frank Foundation, but I also found a very well-preserved factory that had made brushes and brooms during the war, and the owner of this factory, Otto Veit, had employed only deaf and blind Jews. So I thought, well, that's an interesting story. That's going to be my next book. But it wasn't. I researched Otto, I researched the factory. No, there wasn't enough for a good book, and a good book eats up an awful lot of material. While researching that, though, I learned about a woman named Stella Kubler. Her face flashed just for a minute before. I didn't have time for her. And I don't know how to go back with this thing. Stella was one of 18 Jews in Berlin working for the Gestapo, turning other Jews into the Nazis. That's how these 18 Jews survived. And I thought Stella would make a good book. Perhaps she wouldn't, but I didn't want to spend 4 years or so immersing myself into such a depressing story that was bound to anger me and depress me and upset me. I don't like being angry at people. But Sioma and Stella had been friends in that art academy I mentioned. So first there was Otto Veit with that brush and broom factory. Then there was Stella, that evil Jew who turned in other Jews. And then finally, there was Sioma. So I learned about him in 2011. Thought that was going to be my next book. Started researching him. Along the way, I learned about a woman named Noor Inayat Khan, a Sufi. If anybody knows Sufi, he's a Muslim mystic who was a spy for the British in Paris during the war. I instantly thought, I'm doing a book about Noor Inayat Khan. He can wait for a little while. He waited for about 4.5 years. Then I started him when I finished the Noor Inayat Khan book. Start to finish, maybe 14 years. No other book has taken me that long, but really immersing myself in this one, perhaps 4 years. Nobody else should have this touch-and-go story like mine. You should get into a book, do it, and move on to something else. Yes, ma'am. My usual flip answer to that is, I just made it up. But that's not true. Because I interviewed Sioma. I didn't have time to get into that today. I interviewed him in 2012. That's before I learned about Noor Inayat Khan. A friend of mine, a very good friend who lives in Berlin and has been my translator for some of these books, came with me as we tried to trace his bike route. Not with bikes, though. It's impossible to do it, but with an automobile. And then we went down to his home in just outside of Basel and spent a few days interviewing him. And he gave me so many details, and he was so gracious and so open. So a lot of details about all these interpersonal relationships came directly from him. There was also an historian in Berlin, Martina Voigt, who discovered Sioma in 1988. Interviewed him that year, interviewed him the next year, gave me the voluminous transcripts from those interviews. I found documents in Yad Vashem in Israel, in Holocaust museums in the US, and elsewhere. His son, one of his sons, was very helpful as well. So, by talking to an awful lot of people, by pounding an awful lot of sidewalks, and it was detail after detail, and some of which confirmed everything I heard. I was grateful for that, and one or two which were very contrary to one to some of which I'd unearthed, and I'm very frank in the book about a certain story that sounded completely credulous, and I presented originally as a truth. But shortly after telling that tale, I begin to say why it isn't. So I accepted stories, I told stories that perhaps were being embellished by this gentleman, but not by me. Oh, and by the way, this is Sioma in his office in his home just outside of Basel, and the map that's spread out in front of him is the map that he took with him on his biking trip in 1943. A friend of mine says I should organize biking trips from Berlin down to Switzerland, but I'm in no shape for nonsense like that. One or two more?
I just finished the book yesterday, and one of the most amazing histories I've ever read. It also is told almost like a novel, and at some point sort of giving philosophy about life. Did you think very clearly about how you're going to write this book and making it seem like a novel, or did it just sort of come out that way?
Okay, no glib answers for you. Thank you very much. Looking back, oh, I'm sorry. Question was, you finished the book yesterday, thank you. It's been out since September 3rd, you're a very slow reader. And you enjoyed it, thank you very much. And this is a testimonial, I'm not saying this. And it read like a novel. Did I intend to write it like a novel? First of all, I intended to write it. That's all I knew at the outset. I learned with the book I mentioned before, Codename Madeline, about Noor Inayat Khan, that Sufi spy in Paris, that I can write novel-like, truthful tales. And that was probably the training that I needed for Two Whales to Freedom. And originally, when writing books, which probably started in the mid-90s, since I'd been trained as a journalist and worked as a journalist, I wrote like a straight journalist. But with Two Wheels, with Codename, I began to flex my writing muscles just a little bit. And it wasn't very intentional, it was all very intuitive. And part of the intuition, which I realized later I was exercising, was that I was attempting to write in the spirit of Sioma Schoenhaus. He liked to have fun. I wanted readers to the book to have fun. I even cracked some terrible jokes in the book. At one point, I don't know if you remember, he came face to face with some Nazi who had a very thin Hitler-like mustache, and I wrote that this guy must have gone to the Adolf Hitler School of Good Grooming. And I was so happy that my editor didn't take it out. I would have taken her out. Other people have also commented on the novel-like experience of reading the book. But I assure you, it was not preordained. It was done intuitively and with a desire to give readers a sense of what it may have been like to meet this individual. Oh, one thing, if we have a moment or two, jokes. Anybody in the mood for some jokes? I mentioned some that I made up. Okay, in the book, I talk about basically jokes being illegal to tell in Nazi Germany. Got into a lot of trouble. You could even be executed if you told a joke. A woman in Berlin told a joke for which she was indeed executed, beheaded. Goebbels and Hitler went to the top of a big tower in Berlin, and Hitler turned to Goebbels and said, you know, I really want to do something to make my people smile. And Goebbels said, why don't you jump? For that, you lost your head in Berlin. And our good friend Sioma had his favorite joke. Man walks into a fish shop, asks for a Hitler herring. Woman behind the counter says, "We don't have any Hitler herrings." The customer says, "Well, it's very easy to create a Hitler herring. You take a Bismarck herring and you take the brain out of it." Blame it on him, not me. Okay. Do we have any? Yes.
I started with wondering the origin of the name Sioma, whatever the last name was, because Sioma is obviously Russian. You clarified that his parents came from Russia. However, his last name, surname, was actually a German. Can you, is there a story behind it? Now, the second question that I have is connected with Goebbels. Goebbels, in his memoirs, admitted that in Berlin were about 20,000 mixed couples, Jews and Germans. And there was a moment that the Nazi wanted to do some trouble to them. And those 20,000 other half protested, and Goebbels, in order to keep quiet, decided not to push too hard. So it looks like this was a way to sort of reduce the intensity of Nazism against Jews. I wonder if, in this context of those 20,000 supporters of Judaism in the midst of Nazi Berlin, there was the reason that you were able to write this kind of a novel. It appears like a novel in the midst of the Holocaust about Jews. Maybe there was some kind of ingrained tolerance until it is written about toward Jews, so not to create the visibility of problems in the capital.
Okay. Would you like to summarize that? How would you summarize? Sure. Thank you.
So the first part is maybe just the background of his name. And then the second part is what was there maybe something part of the Berlin culture, the 20,000 who were, right.
Married to Jews and really did not appreciate an attempt to break their marriage.
Yeah, do you want to?
Okay. I can only tackle the second half of your question. I know nothing about nomenclature and the derivation of that name, I'm sorry. And as far as those 20,000 Jews, I don't know that much, but it does bring to mind a number, probably thousands, of Jewish men who were married to Christian women who were arrested in Berlin, and they were kept in a certain facility in the center of the city. And those Christian wives of those men protested day after day after day in front of that prison. They wanted their husbands released. The Nazis were so embarrassed by these women that indeed the husbands were released, and as far as I know, they spent the rest of their lives in Berlin, safe until the end of the war. And it's funny to me that you mentioned Goebbels, because while Sioma was preparing his bike trip, created a uniform for himself so he would look like Hitler Youth. He bought himself a backpack so he would look like a Hitler Youth, and he put into the backpack, along with some clothing, a copy of Goebbels' memoirs that had been published before the war. So if anybody stopped him and they found this, they wouldn't suspect he was Jewish, because what kind of a nice Jewish boy would be biking through Germany with a copy of Goebbels' memoirs? So he was very clever.
All right. Oh, would you be willing to take one more question, only because I've seen her hand a couple of times? One more? So please.
She's a friend.
She's a friend.
What was Amy's question?
So the question is, why is it that we're not hearing much of this person until now?
Because I was taking my time writing the book, Amy. Thanks a lot. Because I'm lazier than you think I am, and you've known me since the mid-1990s. That's a very good question. Why have not we heard much about Sioma? I've wondered about that myself. He was good at maintaining his friendships with Christian friends back in Berlin after the war. Oh, and maintaining friendships. I don't know if you remember the first slide that I showed of Dorothy Fleiss, the woman who was smuggled into Switzerland by the spy agency. She ended up living just a few miles from him and visited often. I think we haven't heard much about Sioma because he wanted to live a quiet life in a quiet little suburb in Switzerland. He wasn't necessarily a show-off. He wasn't looking for publicity. He was trying to come to terms with what he'd experienced, with the losses that he felt, with the trauma from those years. He told me that he thought about his parents every day. This father who was very stubborn, this mother who was exceedingly optimistic, and he said he cried about them every day. And he even cried when I was interviewing him, when I was asking him about his parents. But he didn't try to sell his story. He didn't try to extort his story, exploit his story. As I mentioned, there were 4 sons. 2 from the first marriage, 2 from the second one. The younger ones would not talk to me about anything, and I think that's because they're the heirs to his estate, and they want to possess it as much as they can. One even said, well, if I wrote the book, he would have to clear everything. And you've gone to Columbia Journalism School. Amy, you know that books and articles are not cleared by your subjects or by heirs of those subjects, unless you agree beforehand. So I refused to do that. One of the 2 older sons did agree to talk with me. We had a meeting in New York. He and his wife were there from Switzerland. He provided great information. But I just think that Sioma, as extraordinary as he was, wanted to go back to a concept that I raised earlier, wanted to have a normal life. He was seeking a normal life in Berlin during the war. He finally had a normal life after the war. And then I came knocking on his door. And it was a wonderful experience and a very gracious person to meet. And it's wonderful to meet heroes. We need heroes today.
Let's give a wonderful thank you. One thing that's really striking to me is your presentation is harrowing, disturbing, delightful, and that's a contribution is powerful and meaningful. So thank you so very much. We're so glad you were here. Wonderful to host you. So on behalf of the university, on behalf of the Jewish Federation, thank you so much for being here, for the opportunity to be in community, and we look forward to seeing you again in future years. Thanks so much.